Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative take about the world around me. So feedback is important. Feel free to reach out, and the sources to do so will be provided. Also, my Shopify link is included with all the sources to reach out to me. And I make custom-made tumblers and t-shirts. And also, if you have additional special requests, email me. That Shopify link is included in this episode. Alright, so some of the audio platforms that I'm on Speaker, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music. These are just to name a few. So this episode is about the Beach Boys. Here we go. Alright, so, excuse me. So my thoughts about the Beach Boys before I get into the aspects of the facts. Alright, so me personally, the music, I heard it growing up, and I was on the cusp. Sometimes some of the music, oh yeah, really like it, and sometimes like, but also, it just don't want to hear it right now. But also, it is very true that, and I agree with the facts of when I was finding out about everything. This is very teenagery, youth-oriented. So, when you get us to when you're growing up, preteen, kid, well, you're still a kid, but elementary school, preteen, teens. Okay, yeah, sure, it's pretty neat. But as you get older, you're like, it phases out because if you are evolving and becoming an adult, you're not all interested in it. But it just brings you back to a time in your life when you thought that this music was really unique, or catchy or interesting. And so that is really the capstone here about the aspects of music. It has a really good influence on the aspects of being mementos to people's lives. There's certain songs that you play at weddings. There's certain songs that you play when you graduate. There's certain songs that you think about, you reflect on. Some people do this when the birth of a child or what have you. And then, unfortunately, untimely death or death and everything else. There's, songs dedicated to that. There's songs dedicated to spirituality. There's songs dedicated to almost any aspects that you can think about when it comes to the levels and intensities of emotions or variations in emotions, and then the memories that come from it. And so also to the element of it, that beach mentality that the Beach Boys was emulating, which is quite interesting because I found out the fact that only, which I'll get into, that only one member of the Beach Boys actually knew how to surf. So anyway, there's a mentality that goes on to the aspects of getting that vibe from the beach life, especially when you think about the aspects of the beach mentality when it comes to the 50s, 60s. So it was that whole thing of Americana, but also when you get in the aspects of the 60s and so forth, it's aspects of being free and just being, exploring and traveling the world instead of being captured or contained into one space. You're just being your own free word, so to speak. And then that was the spirit that was very elevated in their music, and it helped to like an accent piece. There was an accent piece to the imagery that they were portraying with the aspects of the beach life, that is all about fun in the sun, being young, and not having a care in the world. And that was really, prevalent in the aspects of how the youth and the disposition of tradition and everything else was going on in the 60s. And so also with the aspects of how that went with other, issues that came about when the aspects of the Beach Boys too. All right, with all this said, I'm going to get into the facts of the matter about the Beach Boys. Here we go. And of course, sources will be provided. All right, so pull that up right quick for you. Okay, here we go. The Beach Boys are an American rock band formed in Hawthorne, California in 1961. Originally consisting of brothers Brian, Dennis, and Carl Wilson, their cousins Mike Love, and their friend Al Jardine. They were renowned for their vocal harmonies, adolescent-oriented lyrics, and music integration, becoming one of the most influential artists, influential acts of the rock era. The group's music drew on older pop vocal groups in the 50s, rock and roll, and black R&B, often incorporating classical or jazz elements and unconventional recording techniques under Brian Wilson's direction. Now, the band's career began with their first national hit, Surfin' Safari, which was released in '62, following by a string of successful albums and singles throughout the 1960s, including Surfin' USA, I Get Around, and California Girls. Their 1966 album, Pet Sounds, and the single Good Vibrations are considered landmark works in popular music. Brian Wilson, the primary songwriter and producer, was central to their song through his mental health struggles, which led to the withdrawal from their group and the failed Smile project. So the band's original lineup saw changes early on, with Al Jardine briefly replaced by David Marks during his time at dental school, and Brian being temporarily replaced by Glenn Campbell. And Glenn Campbell was a very successful country music artist, and and that's what's really prevalent by the aspects when it's done right with music. A lot of genres or established ideas of what you think about music can be translated into other forms, and this is the early on, and it makes a lot of sense how the evolution of country has evolved into what you see now. All right, so on tour before Bruce Johnson joined in '65. So the Beach Boys have sold over 100 million records worldwide, making them one of the best-selling brands in history. They have had over 80 song charts worldwide, with 36 in the U.S. Top 40 and 4 reaching number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. So the core quintet was introduced into Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in '88. The group's legacy include a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame and a place at number 12 on Rolling Stone's list of the 100 greatest artists of all time. Despite their success, the band faced significant challenges, including early deaths of Dennis Wilson in '83 and Carl Wilson in 1998, and ongoing conflicts within the group. Brian Wilson passed away on August this year at 2025 at the age of 82. So the current touring lineup, which performs under the name The Beach Boys, includes Mike Love and Bruce Johnson. Along with several other musicians, the band's music continues to represent California culture, combining themes of love, youth, and surf culture throughout sophisticated arrangements. All right, so I'm going to go on and to get into the interesting facts. Here we go. So,
we all know that feeling. You finally manage to get away on vacation and the worrying starts. Will that bogus "beware of dogs" sign keep your home safe? What about that fake camera you set up? And will someone finally find your old hide and key rock? That's where ADT comes in. All that stuff, it's safe-ish. It seems fine when you don't really think about it, but you know it truly doesn't work. Instead, ADT provides security solutions that keep you actually safe, giving you real peace of mind. Because vacation is supposed to be, relaxing. Don't settle for safe-ish. Visit ADT.com today to learn more.
Dennis Wilson lived with Charles Manson. So this is alleged that this happened. And so if y'all haven't seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I would suggest to watch that film because it also, I think that it was really unique with that film because it breaks the idea of Quentin Tarantino's style. So typically with Quentin Tarantino, you get it just all around evolves around severe violence, which I'm not saying that this doesn't do that, but that's towards the end and that moves on and elevates the story, which, most of his works does. But you can see that the slow pace and how everything moves and how the characters disposition themselves, he's really trying to, in himself, give a love memento of the era in which he grew up in. And so it's quite interesting. He also gives a forethought into the aspects of the Manson family, and specifically with what would happen in a world where that didn't exist, and how that is prevalent to think about the aspects of that, I guess you could say, existential mentality of if this didn't happen, what would happen to the course of history of the fate of man in general. And so it's quite interesting with the aspects of how that lays out with this fact of the identity of these these monsters and the mentality and everything of what was before what is really known about their character. And now the book is quite starkly different from the film, which is quite interesting because Quentin Tarantino is all about being meta. So he wrote the book and then he also, of course, produced and directed the film. So if there's any plot holes, that's all up to him because he is the one that foresaw everything and wrote everything and had his hand in everything. So as if he's, doing that reversed meta thought within a thought about to explain everything, then you can get a deeper insight into the book version if you want more deeper elements to what you saw in the film version. So getting back to the point, it's quite interesting with the aspects of going into the element of, you can't really explain that, but what is the facet of these vicious people before it's known to what they are. And so here we go. It says, in 1968, Wilson and Charles Manson were roommates. They lived together from spring to summer on Sunset Boulevard. And so there's also on to that They also with the character, which his nickname was Cowboy or something like that, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. They also make reference to that as the connection of to Brian Wilson. I mean, excuse me, not Brian Wilson. I'm sorry, Dennis Wilson, and how it's different, as if he's just looking for somebody, but he's not necessarily trying to do anything. But when you get into the book version of how everything evolves with the Manson family, you really get the gritty details, and he really just goes no hold bar with that. All right, so there are over 50 unreleased peak era tracks. So there are a couple of albums worth of recordings currently stored at the Beach Boy archives on Van Owen Street in Burbank. Only Dennis could actually surf. So though the name of the famous albums of Beach Boys portray their love of surfing, only Dennis was the one that could really surf in real life. All right, they had friends in high places. Ronald Reagan called then Secretary of the Interior James Watt on the carpet for forbidding the Beach Boys to play in '83. So by July 4th, the gig on the Mall in D.C. So what this is saying, that they had trouble, so they were able to have a presidential oversight to allow them to play. It's quite interesting. And that happens with the aspects of how, influential music is to the culture, or, society, and, politics are going to be involved. And I remember there was this interesting documentary. It was a PBS documentary, and it had centered around the aspects of the governmental influence of having artists, sending artists out as during the World War II or so, and which this happened as an initiative, and then also to have the political sort of ally to get the whole allegiance, as you can say, to get the notion that being American culture, American influence is very valuable, and then we're not to see that American values are not a threat. There's really something to be influenced by, to aspire to be, as a way to gain alliance to the enemy countries, so to speak. All right, so 2 members had to get a restraining order against them. Now, all this is alleged here. So at one time, Mike Love and Dennis Wilson were so at odds with each other that they both had to get a mutual restraining order. So the two have had a long troubled history together. So one exec was fired after capturing Brian Wilson's soul. Wilson was with the Label Brother Records. So at the time, the label executive decided to paint his portrait. This, however, was an execution which was put out with under the distress once with Wilson, which he convinced himself that the portrait which captured his soul. So this goes into the aspects of his mental state. It's not really there. So because of him thinking that this portrait would capture his soul, after painting Brian's portrait, an executive with the label Brother Records quit under distress once Brian became convinced the work had captured his soul. So, again, this is the aspects of putting another piece to the puzzle of why the band at its former glory was restrained. And it's one of those things, So Brian Wilson is deaf in one ear. So though the late Brian Wilson, though, is an extremely talented musician and singer, Wilson is actually deaf in one ear. He thus can't hear in stereo. Which goes along with the aspects of very prolific, musicians who were deaf. And then this goes on with that, but for the aspects of how that works and then understanding music. All right. I would greatly like to know what you all think about this episode. Feel free to make comments. And also the ones that have made comments in the past on YouTube, keep that going because it's greatly appreciated. All right. So this reaches the end of the Harboring Light. Tune in, turn up, and definitely take care. Bye-bye for now.